The Consumer Bankers Association is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, From Rewards to Recognition, How Decision Intelligence Can Reinvent Bank Loyalty, presented by Curinos. My name is Isabella and it is my pleasure to facilitate today's event. Thank you for joining. Please note we are recording and all participant lines are muted. If you have any trouble, please email conferences@consumerbankers.com or send a message in the Q&A box. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include question and answer opportunities at the end. You may submit a question at any time by entering the questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. As a reminder, the views expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not represent the views of CBA or its members. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Sarah Welch, Managing Director of Curinos One, and Olivia Hamill, Director Advisory of Curinos One. Sarah and Olivia, welcome.
Thank you so much, Isabella. We are excited to talk to you all today about how decision intelligence can reinvent bank loyalty. If you can skip ahead to our agenda page, we'll be talking sort of where is the future of rewards and recognition going in banking, and really specifically why the tiered balance-based rewards and model that most banks use today is good in some respects, but also insufficient for a portion of the customer base to drive those loyalty behaviors. We'll walk through where rewards stand in service of loyalty today, where it's headed, and why now is really the moment for banks to be making this shift. It's possible to do this now in a way that it wasn't even a couple years ago with decision intelligence technology. Uh, Moving to the next page. Wanted to provide a picture of sort of where are we today and why conventional loyalty is under threat. If we think about it from the consumer point of view, the single bank customer is really disappearing. Switching costs are low. There are entry points that are fee-free for customers. It's easier to try a bank digitally. Moving money can be instant, and there's really nothing holding a relationship together the way that there used to be as that inertia to switching has broken down. And what we've seen in our data is that the average number of checking relationships that a customer has gone from 1.5 in 2019. So most people have one, some have a couple more. But in 2025, it's up to 2.2, where most customers are banking with more than one institution where you have to compete for that consumer's attention. Institutions, they want to be the place that someone is going to turn to first, be it for meeting more needs, being it for sort of the first card someone reaches for in the wallet, if it's the app someone opens to see the bigger portion of their financial picture, and it's harder and harder to win that attention. On the flip side, from a competitive point of view, fintechs, who we've historically thought of as really going after that paycheck to paycheck segment, with sort of an early direct deposit are developing their propositions and offering rewards that are serving upmarket customers. When we look at Chime, they have a favorable savings rate for a direct deposit, no fees, no balance minimums. SoFi Plus has a subscription model where for $10 a month, there's also that favorable saving rate, among other benefits. And so these companies are serving segments that traditional banks had historically written off with a paycheck to paycheck, but they're moving that foothold to go up market. So banks risk getting squeezed now on segments that are really core to the deposit franchise. And so as we think about that fragmentation among customers, how the fintechs are encroaching, the traditional approach to loyalty really has to evolve to keep up. Going to the next page. If we think about why loyalty, what's sort of the benefits of the bank of driving these behaviors overall, and we can think about it through the course of the customer life cycle. We're on the acquisition side. A benefits program, rewards loyalty, serves as a really compelling hook to bring customers in. What we've seen in our data is for banks perceived as rewarding customers, they have a 75% higher acquisition rate compared to other banks. On the deepening and retention side, once you're able to establish those behaviors that lead to loyalty from customers, we see 3 to 4 times higher balances from those customers. And then on the retention side, we see lower attrition by achieving primacy. And that's really from the start of the relationship. How do you get someone in and how do you drive that sticky, loyal relationship? And ultimately sort of these three factors driving greater profitability for the bank overall. So when we think about sort of what is that traditional model um, of loyalty, of rewards for banks in the deposit space today, and it's historically been through that good, better, best model. Entry level customers get foundational rewards for everyday banking, and as customers build their relationship with the bank, they receive more value from the bank. It's a logical way to think about what that value exchange is. And ultimately, it is effective, right? It's signaling, customers are signaling value, and banks are able to deliver differentiated service. But the limitation here is what tiers are able to see at a single point in time. And depending on how this construct exists, sometimes it's a single point in time, but sometimes it's even a single product that is not necessarily looking at even a full relationship. And so it's been what's worked. It's been compatible with core systems, and tiers will continue to exist to align that value exchange with customers, but there is still an opportunity to evolve loyalty and recognition of customers, thinking about that broader base. So moving to the next page, when we think about who's really qualifying for some of these benefits and who isn't, on the right-hand side here, you can see a chart that shows the distribution of customers and the distribution of deposits associated with these tiers. 80% of customers make up 14% of deposits, but it's a large customer base, that 80% of customers who aren't necessarily getting the visibility from the way that loyalty and product constructs exist today. It's a very narrow definition of value. When we think about, on the left-hand side here, three different kinds of customers. Our first has held $80,000 with the bank for over a decade. It's sat there, it's stagnant, nothing's changing. Customer B moved $80,000 into the bank last week. They are newly engaged with the bank, have unknown potential, but show early value. Customer C, they joined the bank a long time ago with less money, $2,000. They would have been sitting in that entry level, but have gradually saved $80,000 over time through discipline. And so we see three very different customers who, at a point in time, would look the same in a traditional rewards product construct. But ultimately, there's an opportunity here to differentiate more through relevant recognition, through guidance, and through activation that's going to reflect a customer's individual trajectory. We can understand more sort of what is that opportunity among the 80% of customers. You can flip forward a page. So what we're seeing here is a view of a cohort of customers, looking at them sort of from year 1 through year 5. When we look at their balances, in year 1, 90% of balances are from a mass affluent segment, those who would historically qualify for rewards, and 10% is mass market. When we track that cohort over time, we can see that the mass market becomes a far more meaningful portion of the deposit base, moving from just 10% in year 1 to a third of the balances that the bank holds in year 5. And while we can look at these dotted lines where the mass affluent have actually decreased their average balance over time while the mass market has grown. And so there is meaningful growth potential in that 10% of balances, which is actually a far larger portion of customers who show graduation promise and the ability to grow with the bank, but who largely go overlooked by sort of traditional reward constructs today. We can also put a number on sort of what is that overall opportunity. If we go to the next page, we've sized up here, right, on a base of 1 million customers, sort of what does that opportunity look like? What is the untapped opportunity in that entry-level segment that isn't necessarily qualifying for benefits today? There are 3 different ways to think about this. One is, gosh, if we just increase retention, if they could stay for longer, In year five, we would see around 280 million in incremental deposits. In scenario two, what if we fostered greater relationships with them such that they grow their balances more? There's about a $320 million opportunity in that. And when we think about scenario three here, what we consider sort of true loyalty of top retention and sort of higher customer balances based on our benchmarks, there's really an untapped opportunity there of $640 million. And so it's not a small opportunity, but it is sort of upside that the loyalty programs and rewards and product constructs that exist today don't necessarily sort of see or have access to. So before we kind of move into where loyalty's headed, I would love to run a poll with you all in terms of understanding how your institution rewards loyalty today. Um, Realizing there are different ways of loyalty, different ways to reward customers, but as you think of sort of the primary way, is it by a customer's overall balances? Is it by a customer's tenure with the bank? By a customer's account or product breadth, or by a customer specific product ownership? Is it mortgage, credit card, checking? Or maybe it's something else that we haven't captured here. Give you all a couple seconds to reply. Okay, so it looks like overall balances, specific product ownership. So really thinking about sort of what is the snapshot? What is that sort of individual's experience with the bank um, overall? With that, I'll hand it over to Sarah to talk about sort of where is loyalty headed?
Thank you, Olivia. I think, what we've focused on here is a little bit around the limitation of kind of traditional loyalty models, but they're not wrong, right? It's not that they're not doing an important service, but I think we need to recognize that the context or the environment around them has changed. Customer relationships, as Olivia was pointing out, are a lot more fragmented. Customer expectations are a lot more individualized. And increasingly, banks actually have access to, as kind of the plumbing of data gets more and more sophisticated, to a lot more signals than they have kind of had at their fingertips historically, which is kind of what Olivia was asking, where are we going next? What should loyalty look like in a more kind of customer first AI enabled world? And so if you jump down to 2 slides from now, not this one, but the next one, what we would say is, if a traditional loyalty program is doing an important job, it is determining who qualifies for differentiated benefits and services and experiences. But their limitation is that they evaluate customers based primarily on where they are today, on some of the things that were showing up in that poll. But loyalty is not in and of itself a static concept, right? Customer relationships are always moving, they're strengthening, they're weakening, they're consolidating, they're fragmenting, they're becoming more primary over time, sort of lots of different possible trajectories. And when two customers hold the same balance today, they can represent completely different future outcomes for the bank. One might be perfectly stable, one might be growing really quickly, one might be looking to leave, right? And so trajectory adds the context that
Sarah, you're on mute.
VPN adventures today. So my VPN keeps kicking me out and putting me back on. And when I come back on, apparently I'm mute. So apologies all for that technical difficulty. Anyway, so what I was saying was, right, when two customers hold the same balance today, they can represent totally different future outcomes for the bank. One could be stable, one might be growing rapidly, one might be on the cusp of leaving. And without being able to understand the trajectory, it's hard to really know what should we do next for any one of those customers, right? And so trajectory adds in really important context that loyalty models can't necessarily see. So trajectory is something that would give us signal on not only the current value of the customer and the relationship that they have, but their momentum, potential intent, and the future potential of the relationship. And as loyalty kind of evolves in a more customer first and AI enabled world, the qualification of a tier and the potential for a customer to qualify for that, right, to self-motivate, to grow, is really not sufficient. So if sort of the traditional activation around loyalty programs has focused on who qualifies, the next step really becomes, now that we have the data, now that we have kind of AI capabilities at our fingertips, the question we should answer is what should happen next, given what I know about this customer and their trajectory. So Olivia mentioned on an earlier slide when we were looking at the distribution of customers and their balances, the $80,000 customers, and sort of that, I think, illustrates why these concepts matter. So she had identified 3 customers with 80,000 that on the surface all looked very similar. But and I think we can jump down to the next slide here. The how we want to treat those customers is really different, right? And today we tend to use language like tiers and triggers and decisions and activation interchangeably, but they really are doing very different things. A tier is going to answer, right, whether or not somebody qualifies. It's about eligibility for benefits and service models. A trigger is really just paying attention to somebody's context and really the moments that might deserve a little bit more attention as it relates to activation. But decision intelligence is really answering a very different question, which is what should happen next? Not for every single person in a segment, not for everyone who's tripped a trigger or crossed a particular balance threshold, but for a very specific customer, each and every customer in a specific moment relative to the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So decision and decision intelligence isn't necessarily replacement for tiers or for triggers. The best kind of loyalty programs are using all 3, right? The tiers are creating consistency and an understanding that is transparent for a customer to understand service levels, benefits for kind of consolidating more of a relationship with you. The triggers are creating contextual awareness of, hey, we might be in a heightened moment of importance for a particular customer. But decision intelligence is something that creates relevance. So, it's determining whether or not a moment, a trigger, a threshold realization actually matters for the outcome we're looking to drive with that customer, whether that's primacy or a balanced outcome or a total relationship value outcome. And that's really at the heart of the evolution that we're describing, right? It's not going, it's how do we move beyond sort of monolithic treatment of people by tiers or by segments, and segments could be defined by triggers, but really understanding each customer and their trajectory and the relationship of those things to the outcome that we know is going to unlock value both for the customer and for the bank and institution. And the kind of piece that can connect the customer trajectory to action is what we call decision intelligence, right? And the question that we all have when we're looking to activate at that individual customer level in a much more relevant way is, how do we turn trajectory into intelligent action? Right? Most of you have at your fingertips today, thanks to a lot of the plumbing work that's been done over the past kind of 5+ years, access to the signals that give you an understanding of that customer, the degree to which they are eligible for any particular loyalty tier, and the changing kind of nature of their trajectory, right? When balances are changing, when they're opening new products, if they've signed up for direct deposit, if they're engaging with you in digital channels. So you have a lot of information. And you also have, most banks have been investing quite significantly over the past decade plus in execution layer elements that give you the ability to act in any moment a customer or on any screen or surface that a customer might be showing up on. You've got great mobile apps and email systems and CRM systems and contact centers. And, so you have the data, you have the channels. The question is, how do we connect and close the synaptic gap between, a customer, understanding that a customer is in a particular state and whether or not you should nudge them towards another tier, for example. So going back to that customer with $80,000, right? 3 customers where the signals look really, really similar. They all have the same balance. They all qualify for the same exact tier. They may even trigger the same kind of campaign situational awareness, but they're not the same customer, right? One might deserve investment. One might just be somebody you should monitor, and one you should maybe do nothing at all with. And the decision layer is what is connecting the dots on that synaptic gap today, right? It is sitting between what we know and what we do. And as loyalty evolves in this kind of customer first and AI-enabled world, this capability is what is separating institutions that can react to kind of the customer behavior on a gross or kind of big segment level from those that are actually able to activate at a customer level in a way that is what customers say they want and expect from their institutions today. So if we jump to the next slide, this table is really just a summary of what we've talked about over the past couple of slides here. And we put this here because we all use the same words, but sometimes they mean different things to us. And these concepts are often lumped together, but they're solving very different problems. And so we thought it was important to just sort of underline them a little bit and the differences and distinctions between them. So tier logic is really answering the question of, does somebody qualify for a particular bundle of benefits and or service and or product models? It is a point in time status and is really just about eligibility. A trigger is monitoring, right? It is constantly looking for, did something happen? And we all have hypotheses about what triggers matter. And, they are important intentional signals for sure. But they are simply identifying that something might deserve attention. The decision intelligence layer is really asking a different question altogether, and that is, should something happen next? And if so, what should happen next? Not for everybody in a segment, not for even everybody who tripped a trigger, but for a specific customer in a specific moment with a specific kind of trigger set relative to the outcomes that the customer might be trying to achieve and that the bank is trying to achieve. What is the right thing to do next? So these are very distinct, each very important in their own right concepts. So the tiers essentially are going to create consistency that helps a customer navigate a series of offerings. Triggers are really important for the bank to understand situational awareness for a customer, but decision intelligence is going to create relevance, right? It's going to determine, well, given what I know about a customer, should I do anything about it? And if so, what? And that's really the shift that is powering kind of the next stage of loyalty. So let's jump to the next slide, which is a peek into another fun poll. And, we've talked about tiers, we've talked about triggers, we've talked about decision intelligence. Curious for your institution today, what actually drives recognition most frequently? And would want you to answer this question from the point of view of today, not what's sort of aspirationally on your roadmap or kind of in a future build, but what's true in your practice today. Are those recognition and engagement moments kind of most driven by tiers? Are they most driven by triggers, by a combination of those? Or are you already using decision intelligence to determine kind of, should we do anything here? And if so, what? So we'll give folks a moment to get through. And I think the big question is, right, are you coordinating? All right, so most are just on the observation of whether or not you qualify for a tier. A smaller portion, 15%, are activating on triggers. So somebody's tripped a trigger or identified a particular context and you're acting on that. And a very small portion are using decision intelligence to coordinate and across events, across kind of triggers and tiers. And so it looks like tiers and trigger combinations are also pretty healthy combination. Excellent. All right, so let's jump into this next slide here. So if tiers are essentially answering, does somebody qualify for something, and decision intelligence on the other end of the spectrum is answering kind of what should happen next, the question that emerges in between those two things is, what are we actually trying to do here for the bank and for the customer, right? And the answer isn't the same for everyone. For customers that already qualify for premium tiers, they deserve recognition, right? And we have the systems generally in place, according to the poll, right, that do that through the differentiated benefits, pricing, servicing models that are a part of a tiering structure that you're doing kind of a good job of activating on today. But the kind of objective function question that we would still have for these customers is, well, what are we trying, what's the outcome we're looking to drive, right? Is it that we're looking to drive the long-term value or lifetime value of this customer? Are we looking to drive balances at a reasonable marginal cost of funds within the next 12 to 18 months. So to answer those questions, like, is the right thing to do to deepen the relationship across more products? Is it about increasing the primacy within the context of the checking product? Is it about preventing attrition of balances? Is it maybe doing nothing because the relationship is already behaving exactly the way that we think it should, and that we don't necessarily want to be putting all sorts of stimuli that might train that customer to be dependent on the next promo, the next, right, where they're not necessarily displaying that kind of sensitivity today. And, I think the thing that's interesting as you start to contemplate those questions is none of those decisions ultimately are about tier qualification at all, right? We know whatever their tier qualification is. What we're trying to get at is how do we maximize the value outcome from this relationship? And that's for customers that actually are eligible for tiers. As Olivia was saying earlier, there's a big chunk of the iceberg below the waterline that sits well below loyalty thresholds today. And for those customers, the objective is also very different, right? I think that the question we want to answer for those folks is, how do we identify and encourage those who can have positive momentum before they even become valuable, right? How do we recognize progress? How do we reinforce the right kind of consistent financial behaviors that will lead to tier eligibility in the future? Are we delivering guidance at the right moments for these customers? Are we paying attention to the sort of competitive sharks that might be looking to pick them off? And are we inoculating them from those competitive kind of pickoffs in advance? And that's, I think, as Olivia was saying earlier, where a lot of institutions have a blind spot today, right? Most institutions are probably doing a good job of serving the top 5 or 10% of customers today. And yet there is a massive opportunity that often sits with the 80%, 90% of customers who aren't going to qualify for premium benefits today, but represent the next generation of those really valuable, primary, deep, sticky relationships tomorrow. And this is where the concept of kind of recognition becomes much, much broader than tiered rewards, right? Recognition could be a benefit, but it also could just be a message or some guidance. It might be an offer, but it might be just the bank demonstrating to somebody that they understand where that customer is in their journey, and that customer is still valuable to them. I think at the underpinning of all of this is we're not here to treat all customers equally, right? We want to treat all customers appropriately for their context and their goals and outcomes as well as ours. And that's really the purpose and the point of decision intelligence. And that's what it enables and unlocks at scale today.
Sarah, we had a good question in the chat that I think this is a great point to address. That there was a question around, are there other attributes beyond balances, attributes that banks are not considering to tier customers? I think a really important distinction here is tiers are something that are still really outward facing in terms of that acquisition hook and the way that a customer can expect an experience with a bank. I think where triggers and decision intelligence starts to differentiate from tiers is that it is an experience that someone goes through in the sense of offering something that is relevant, something that is context rich to where they are in that point of time. So those attributes that influence the way that triggers, the way that decision intelligence interacts with a customer becomes more complex than something you would want to put on a traditional tiered product. or offering.
Exactly. And the one layer I might add to that, Olivia, and I love this question, is what is your most important objective for that customer, right? And or as an institution, right? So if the most important outcome for an institution is around balance building and balance growth, looking for those behaviors and signals of engagement, whether that's transactional engagement or it's engagement even with your digital advice and guidance and tips and tricks and tools. Those signals identify that somebody is going to be with you for the long haul, right? They are engaging with you in sort of a primary relevant way, and primary kind of translates to, over time, incremental deposits at a relatively low cost of funds. If you're kind of got a different objective function around product depth, you may want to be paying attention to life stage signals and maybe some third-party signals that are going to give you a sense for where that customer is in their overall journey in life, and therefore kind of relevance to problem solving or financial guidance and or tools that they need to sort of enter or deal with the next phase of their kind of stage. So it depends a little bit on objective function too. So if we jump to the next slide, I think it always helps to have a concrete example. So we brought a couple for you to sort of guide this conversation. So let's start with Avery. She is 28. She's got a checking account, a direct deposit, and she's got a whopping $100 in savings. And by almost every traditional loyalty framework, she would be pretty invisible, right? She doesn't qualify for any premium benefits today. She doesn't have enough balances to attract any special attention from your bankers, right? Right now, some might say, well, that's okay, because a loyalty framework is supposed to be motivating in its own right? That maybe Avery sees the tiers and understands, hey, there are benefits and I want to work to the next level of benefits. I think that's true to some extent. The kind of damper I might put on that a little bit in this category is progress doesn't necessarily happen that quickly in this category, right? If, let's say I'm a Starbucks kind of junkie, right? I buy coffee every day. And I can't imagine not having that a part of my kind of daily routine, potentially multiple points in the day. And if that's the case, right, I can see myself moving to the next level and the next level and the next reward pretty easily. But banking is a little bit different, right? Financial progress is something that unfolds over months and years, not every day. And so, there are meaningful milestones, building your first savings, which Avery looks like she's starting to do here, establishing financial stability with a rainy day fund that's at least 500 or 600, saving for a first home. Right? They're meaningful milestones, but they don't always move somebody to the next tier. And so, when there's not recognition for a long time, right? For me to go from this to even, say, a gold tier, I might need 100,000 in total deposits, and that might be quite a ways away or unfathomable to me as Avery right here and right now, right? So even if, as Avery, I start saving consistently, I start building that emergency fund, I get a raise and a little bit more coming in every month. I put some rainy day money in a CD. I research what you've got out there in terms of mortgage advice and guidance, right? None of those actions are moving me to another tier, but they represent really strong signal of positive momentum that this is a relationship that's getting stronger and stronger, right? And that's where the trajectory-based recognition does change the equation. So instead of waiting, right, until Avery has become valuable enough to qualify for the next tier, we have the ability to begin recognizing and reinforcing the behaviors that will help her get there eventually, but it might take many years, right? So I think the shift might be, rather than thinking about these programs as simply there to reward successful or valuable customers today, how can we start to turn the tides and help use them to create more of those successful customers as we go forward? All right, so if Avery is our sort of not yet qualifying, not affluent example, let's look at the next slide where we've got Sam. And Sam is exactly the kind of customer that most loyalty programs were built to serve, right? He moves $80,000 into the bank and immediately qualifies for, let's say, the gold tier, a premium tier. The traditional loyalty model sees that as a success, right? He qualifies, he gets the benefits, check, check, check. But if you look at the journey on this slide, there's some interesting things happening underneath the hood here, right? Under a tier logic, the 6 different sort of moments would all produce essentially the same outcome. His premium benefits are maintained. The new relationship, everything is maintained, right? The 3 months later, the premium benefits are maintained. He's got some emerging attrition risk. The premium benefits are maintained. In a way, it's sort of administrative, right? The system knows that at any given point in time, let's say every month, that Sam qualifies for the tier-based recognition, regardless of what he's doing down the side here. What the tier-based system doesn't recognize is how Sam's relationship is evolving. And this is where it is helpful to separate triggers from kind of decision intelligence. A trigger will say, oh, Sam moved $80,000 into account. He maintained his balances. He showed some signs of potential balance outflow. He established a direct deposit. All of those are useful signals. But the trigger itself doesn't tell us whether an intervention is going to be useful here, right? Is it going to change the outcome? And that's where the decision intelligence capability comes into play, because it enables us to ask a different question. Can we influence the outcome here, right? So let's take that $80,000 deposit. A trigger might automatically generate an outreach because a particular threshold was crossed. But decision intelligence may say, hey, wait a second, an outreach in this moment isn't necessary at all, because Sam is already showing signs of becoming primary. And if we reach out to him with an offer or something kind of as an extra benefit, we may just be attaboying something that was already going to happen, right? And that might not change his future behavior. And in that case, maybe no action or decision is the right decision, right? And so the system that helps make relevance at an individual level is taking into account, yes, he's in this tier. Yes, he has this trajectory, this context, but what should we do about it? Should we do anything, right? Is an intervention going to move us towards an outcome that we care about, right? And so, I mean, maybe the signal or a trigger around the outflow might be worth paying attention to, right? And that is, again, where decision intelligence can be useful. Does Sam, in this broader context, have the right signal, not just in tier kind of qualification or eligibility, but in other trajectories around primacy. So he has this signal of risk around balance attrition, but he's got, 3x the amount of signal around primacy. And that balance may be worth reaching out about to say, hey, is there something that we can do to keep those balances here? The point is not every customer signal is going to deserve an action, right? But every customer signal should get a decision. And sometimes the important decision is we shouldn't do anything for right now. So on the next slide, I think we're just going to transition to sort of why now, right? We've been talking about what decision intelligence is. Why isn't everybody doing it? And the answer was, in the past, the trajectory model at an individual customer level was virtually impossible to achieve at scale. Right? If we take Avery, to recognize that she is building a stronger relationship, we'd need to connect the recurring savings activity, the deposit growth, the trajectory of that deposit growth, her income changes, the product adoption, the mortgage research interaction engagement that she's had with various parts of your sort of interactions in web pages, and engagements across multiple channels and systems, to be able to make a decision that makes sense for Avery. And similarly for Sam, which we've talked about. And a lot of places, those insights haven't lived in a single place. They're scattered across silos, whether those are product silos, functional silos, EDW silos, right? And even if you have a beautiful data lake where all of that information is pulled together, you still have to decide, well, who should we engage, and what should we offer, and when should we act, and when should we do nothing at all? And to answer those questions, it's required data scientists and analysts to look at and evaluate the state of data, which requires a whole lot of organizational work, and then structured exploratory data analysis and testing around, is this something that we can actually use as a trigger? And then once you've identified, yes, we feel confident about using this as a trigger that we want to act on, we then have to code up rules for, well, what are we going to do when that trigger trips? And so that also takes an army of folks to sort of put together the rules for engagement. And we can only really do that at a macro segment level, right? It's too expensive people time-wise to sort of code up anything that could be operational at an individual customer level. So on the next slide, we see the outcome, right, of all of that. And I think intention's generally good, but the reality is we tend to throw a lot. So every time somebody meets eligibility criteria, every time somebody has tripped a particular trigger and becomes eligible for a campaign or a nudge, we do it. And the sort of sense from the customer world is we don't love it. And that it feels like you don't know me, you don't understand me. And in this digital first, AI first world, the expectation is that you are going to know me. And instead of just simply increasing outreach, I want you to increase the relevance to me. And that matters with loyalty programs, right? How do we make something relevant in a way that keeps the Averys of the world moving up in a more kind of steady state and not at risk of getting picked off by the sort of increasingly sophisticated competitors out there. And it can actively erode trust when we are just simply activating, right? The ability to activate doesn't mean we should. In this category in particular, where the relationships unfold over decades, right? The more is not better. Better is better. And that's really what the decision intelligence capability enables you to do. So on the next slide, this is essentially showing how can a bank determine the right action here, right? At its core, every good decision starts with two inputs. Who's the customer, right? And not just what are their balances, right? Not just what products are they in, but their trajectory, their relationship depth, their engagement with you, their financial behaviors, their likelihood to deepen, consolidate, or attrite, right? That's the customer context side of the equation. And the second input is, well, what is the bank trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to grow deposits? Are we trying to increase primacy? Are we trying to drive product depth? Are we looking to retain balances or a relationship? Are we looking to get more efficient in our ability to raise funds? And these objectives really matter because the same customer can get very, very different actions depending on the outcome that you're looking to create. So if we go back to Sam, if the objective is simply activity, we could send a message every time a trigger is tripped. But if the objective is to maximize the long-term relationship value with Sam, we may decide not to intervene when the relationship looks like it's progressing along pretty naturally, right? And for Avery, we might see a customer that's below the threshold of tiers and tiered benefits, but the right decision framework sees somebody who's demonstrating stronger and stronger habits and increasing their level of engagement. And you might want to engage her a little bit more frequently to keep that behavior going and growing. And so these two things together are where the decision intelligence capability really plays. And it is at a person level. So on the next slide, I think this is probably one of the more important slides that we have, because when most people hear decision intelligence, they immediately think about the left-hand side of the page, right? More growth, more balances, more product adoption, more engagement, more retention, and those really do matter. But I would argue that the right side of this is equally important and kind of much less activated on today, because at the bottom line in this category, as we've talked about, with the long time horizons of the relationships, every customer decision has a cost, right? Every incentive has a cost. Every retention offer has a cost. Every campaign or banker interaction or promotional rate has a cost, right? And our goal at the end of the day is to create more incremental value, right? And so the questions we want to answer before we take an action, just because somebody has an opportunity, is, are we going to cannibalize? Are we subsidizing things that are, already in motion that we don't need to subsidize? Right? Do we need to? What is the cost of taking this action? And the cost can have a hard cost, like I'm cannibalizing the balances, or a soft cost, which is, hey, this incremental sort of action here or touch point is actually communicating to the customer that we're not relevant. We don't understand what relevance is, which makes that customer less likely to engage with any future interaction that we put in front of them. And so there's an opportunity cost that's a little bit softer that's there too, right? And our goal is to maximize the return on the incentive dollars that we're spending, the marketing dollars that we're sending, the bankers that we have, right, and the basis points for the institution. So just to bring it home here, obviously we are passionate about this because we have a decision intelligence platform. And on the next slide, we don't think that banks have a data problem. We don't think banks have an execution problem. We don't think banks have a modeling problem. But what is missing is sort of a decision coordination problem, right? And Curinos One is a platform that we have created that's designed to provide the decision layer that we've been talking about throughout the conversation. And it sits in between your data layers and your execution layers to identify where there is opportunity, help you evaluate, should we make a decision here or not, and then distribute decisions and learn from everyone in a way that makes the system smarter and smarter and smarter at the customer level, right? For Avery, for Sam, for Sarah, for Olivia, and for each of the customers, given what we know about them in this moment with the context that they have, what should happen next? And they're oriented to helping you make decisions to drive outcomes. Is this about acquiring customers better who are the future Averys out there, and how do we bring more of them to our front door as efficiently as possible? Is it about making more of the customers that you have, right? Getting them to primary relationships with Commit, driving the depth of the relationship and the balances that they have with Compound, keeping those balances and relationships on with Conserve, right? So this is what we think connects the dots between customer context, your institutional objectives, and the actions that you could distribute customer by customer in a way that makes the bank better and better. On the next slide, what we're looking at here is kind of the four pieces of the Curinos One capability and how they work together. And the first is intelligent customer identification. And this is what allows you to distinguish between kind of three customers who, by a balance tiering or a product tiering, might look exactly the same but have very different trajectories. The second is a reinforcement learning engine. So one of the challenges with sort of traditional trigger-based journeys and campaigns is that the rules don't evolve, right? They ossify pretty quickly. And when you have a reinforcement learning engine at the core, it is continuously evaluating, hey, we made this decision, what happened after? Did it improve the outcome that we were looking to move? Yes or no? The third is agentic execution with guardrails. This isn't about an autonomous system deciding your loyalty strategy or pricing strategy or brand strategy or how to activate. This is about how do you set the objectives and the guardrails and then enable the system to operate within those constraints at a scale that a marketing team or people cannot, right? When you start kind of getting to customer level decisioning, the complexity goes through the roof. And the last is connected workflows, probably the least glamorous capability portion, but obviously very important. And being able to kind of understand and act on a customer across all of their sort of spaces that they interact with the bank with and products that they interact with, have that be governed at a customer level is an important piece of the puzzle. So if I leave with one final thought, I think the big opportunity that we're standing in front of here is optimizing the decisioning around what should happen next. And that's really, if loyalty programs today and the tiers have really been about eligibility, this is somebody's eligible, combining with triggers, which is what's their context today, then it becomes closing the loop on, well, what should we do about it and how do we keep customers moving up in potential. All right, lots of talking. I don't know that I left too much time for Q&A, but if anybody has any specific questions, happy to stick around and answer. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Olivia and Sarah. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. If anyone has any remaining questions, please let me know. You all have my email address, and I'll make sure they get to Sarah and Olivia. But other than that, thank you guys so much for joining us. With that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.